Something good happens to you. A relationship finally feels right, a project comes together, a morning arrives where everything is calm and you feel genuinely, unexpectedly okay. And instead of just letting that be good, some part of your brain quietly pipes up. Careful, don't get used to this. Something's coming. And maybe you brush it off, but the feeling doesn't fully leave. You find yourself mentally scanning the horizon for the thing that's going to ruin it. You soften the happiness, keep it at arm's length, resist fully inhabiting it. You tell yourself you're being realistic, mature, not one of those people who gets blindsided because they expected too much. But here's the question worth sitting with. What if that instinct isn't wisdom? What if it's something else entirely? Something older, something learned, something that once protected you and now quietly keeps you from fully living your own life? Because there is a real, documented psychological phenomenon where people are not just pessimistic, not just cautious, but genuinely, functionally afraid of happiness itself. Researchers call it cherophobia, though that clinical label doesn't quite capture the texture of it. It's not that these people don't want to be happy. Most of them want it desperately. It's that happiness for them has become unconsciously associated with danger, with the moment before something breaks, with the part of the story right before everything goes wrong. Let me tell you how that association forms. Imagine a child who grows up in an unpredictable household. Not necessarily a dramatic one. It doesn't have to be chaotic or abusive in any obvious way. It just has to be inconsistent. A parent whose mood shifts without warning. A period of warmth followed unpredictably by coldness or absence. Stability that arrives and then disappears. What that child's nervous system learns, because the nervous system is a learning machine above everything else, is that calm is not safe. Calm is the eye of the storm. Calm is the moment before the other shoe drops. This is what trauma-informed psychologists call hypervigilance. And one of its subtler, less discussed forms is the inability to tolerate positive emotional states. Because for the child who grew up in that inconsistent environment, happiness was repeatedly followed by disruption. The good feeling became a signal, not a destination, but a warning. Your brain, operating below the level of conscious awareness, learned to treat joy the way a smoke detector treats smoke, not as something to enjoy, as something to monitor, as the precursor to fire. And the brain doesn't unlearn that easily, not without intention, not without understanding. Here's where the neuroscience gets interesting. The same brain region, the anterior insula, that processes physical pain also processes anticipated emotional pain. And research has found that for some people, the anticipation of losing something good activates nearly as strongly as actually losing it. Which means that for someone with this particular psychological pattern, being happy and being afraid of losing happiness can feel like almost the same experience. The joy and the dread become fused. You can't quite have one without the other. Paul Gilbert, a British psychologist who has done significant work on compassion-focused therapy, has written about what he calls fear of positive emotion, a pattern where people actively resist states of contentment, warmth, or joy because those states feel vulnerable. Because to feel good is to have something to lose. And having something to lose is, for a nervous system trained in loss, genuinely threatening. There's a version of this that shows up in a way you might recognize even if you've never put a name to it. It's the person who, in the middle of something wonderful, a vacation, a celebration, a quiet good moment with someone they love, suddenly feels inexplicably sad, or anxious, or both. Not because anything is wrong, but because the goodness itself triggers something, an awareness of impermanence, a grief that arrives preemptively. The Japanese have a phrase for the awareness that beautiful things don't last, mono no aware. And while that's a philosophical and often beautiful concept, for some people it tips into something less philosophical and more like a reflex, a way the body preemptively mourns what it hasn't yet lost. There's also a version of this that's less about fear of loss and more about fear of unworthiness, and this one is extremely common. It's the person who, when things are going well, experiences not anxiety about losing it, but a quieter, stranger feeling. This isn't really mine. I don't deserve this. It's going to be taken away not because life is uncertain, but because I'm not the kind of person good things happen to. This is what psychologists call internalized shame. The belief, usually formed early and usually below conscious awareness, that one's fundamental self is somehow defective, unworthy, or undeserving of sustained good fortune. People with internalized shame don't consciously think, I'm bad and therefore I shouldn't be happy. It doesn't work at that level. It works more like a thermostat. Happiness rises to a certain level and then something, a thought, a behavior, a self-sabotage, brings it back down to the set point that feels familiar, that feels like home, even if home was never particularly comfortable. This is why you sometimes see people ruin their own good moments, not out of self-pity or drama, but out of something more mechanical. They start an argument right before a milestone. They procrastinate on the thing that would move them forward. They deflect a compliment so thoroughly it practically disappears. They're not doing it on purpose. They're doing it because their nervous system is regulating, returning to the emotional temperature it recognizes as normal. And normal, for these people, doesn't include sustained happiness. There's one more layer here, and it's cultural. In many parts of the world, and in many families regardless of culture, there is a deeply embedded superstition around expressing happiness. Don't brag. Don't count your chickens. Don't tempt fate. Various traditions hold versions of this, from the evil eye to knocking on wood, to the instinct to add a qualifier anytime something good is acknowledged out loud. And while these traditions have their own wisdom, when they're absorbed into a child's psychological framework as a primary operating principle, they can produce adults who genuinely believe, on some pre-rational level, that acknowledging happiness will cause it to end, that the universe is watching, and pleasure must be hidden to be protected. So what do you actually do with this? Because understanding the psychology of something is satisfying, but incomplete if there's nowhere to take it. The first thing, and I mean this practically, is to practice staying in the good feeling just a few seconds longer than your instinct tells you to. This sounds almost absurdly simple, but research on what psychologist Rick Hansen calls taking in the good shows that the brain's negativity bias, its tendency to let negative experiences stick while positive ones slide off, can be gently, deliberately countered by consciously holding positive experiences in awareness for 15 to 30 seconds longer than you normally would. Long enough for them to begin encoding differently. Long enough for the nervous system to start learning that good feelings are not automatically followed by catastrophe. The second thing is to notice, with curiosity, not judgment, the specific moment when you start pulling away from happiness. What triggers the retreat? What thought arrives to interrupt the feeling? Because the retreat is not random, it follows a pattern. And patterns, once visible, lose some of their automaticity. And the third thing, the deepest one, is to consider the possibility that you actually deserve this. Not as an affirmation, not as a thing to say to yourself in a mirror, but as a genuine, examined proposition. What would it mean if the good things in your life were simply yours? Not borrowed, not temporary, not contingent on your continued worthiness, just yours. That's a frightening thought for some people. And the fact that it's frightening is exactly the information. If this resonated somewhere real, drop a comment. I want to know, is it the fear of losing it, the feeling that you don't deserve it, or something else that makes happiness hard to hold? And if you're new here, we do this every week, the psychology underneath the things we do that we can't quite explain. Subscribe if that sounds like your kind of conversation. See you next time.